Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List. Welcome to our program today. And today we continue with another one of our discussions sponsored by the Bridge Alliance, which we call Repairing America's Broken Democracy. And most of us agree our democracy needs a little bit of repair. And toward that end, I'd like you to welcome our guest today, Keith Allred. Keith is the Executive Director of the National Institute for Civil Discourse. Keith, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me, David.
So Keith, I don't know anybody that is not in favor of civil discourse. I do know lots of people who think it's we don't have a lot of it. And so welcome again to our program, and tell us a little bit about what the National Institute for Civil Discourse is, and perhaps more importantly, what it does and how you're doing toward accomplishing your objectives.
Great, thank you, David. So we have an interesting origin story, actually. The University of Arizona established us in the weeks following the Tucson shooting that killed 6 and injured another 13, including Representative Gabby Giffords, who was having a Congress on Your Corner event. A part of that story that a lot of people don't know is that in the weeks just prior to the Tucson shooting, Gabby had been talking to the University of Arizona about her concerns with declining civility and bipartisanship in the Congress. The Affordable Care Act debate was going on at the time. She was less than impressed with the quality of the debate. And so she was encouraging the University of Arizona to establish an institute or a center that would address the issues. So when the Tucson shooting happened just a few weeks later, they were committed to not letting that be the last chapter in the story. And so went ahead to establish it. And that event gave the university real convening power. So George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton were the honorary co-chairs at the founding. Today, Tom Daschle and Christy Todd Whitman are the co-chairs. Sandra Day O'Connor, Colin Powell, Madeleine Albright, Katie Couric, Al Simpson, Olympia Snow, just a really impressive, I think the most impressive bipartisan group of leaders in the country standing up for the proposition that we should engage our differences more constructively. So that we just celebrated our 10th anniversary this last year and have been working, since then to help build the nation's capacity to engage our differences constructively. So that's the origin story. And if you'd like, I can get into, okay, so, what are you going to do about it if there's not much civil discourse?
We seem as divided as ever. So what's the National Institute for Civil Discourse going to do about it? Good question. Thanks for asking it.
Right. So, and I'll just acknowledge at the beginning that in the 10 years since NICD was founded, it has only gone backwards, so our mission is, we are swimming against the tide here. And I just want to say how serious we are about and clear-eyed we are about the magnitude of the challenge. This is not an easy problem to overcome. So let me give you a little bit of our strategic take on why things have gotten so bad and the insights then that gives into what we can do about it and the success we've had there. Political scientists have had to draw new distinctions to be able to adequately describe the kind of polarization that we're experiencing in the country today. And one of the new distinctions they've drawn is between issues and social or affective polarization. So issues polarization is how far apart is the average Republican or Democrat on the policy issues themselves at a granular level. Social or affective polarization is how mad are we at each other across that divide. And then it's also important to distinguish about which groups we're talking about when we're talking about polarization. So you've got one distinction between elected officials and citizens. And then within citizens, it's important to distinguish between those who are actively engaged in politics and those that aren't. So if you take the kind of 10 to 20% of citizens who are actively engaged in politics, that's a much different group politically than everybody else. So if you think about those 3 different groups, elected officials, politically active citizens, and the the rest of the citizens. And then you think about issues versus social polarization. That gives you 6 cells in a table, if you can imagine that. And the evidence suggests that polarization is the highest ever recorded and going up in 5 of the 6 cells. So it's pretty sobering. And with respect, particularly to elected, let me just give a little bit of the flavor of that. It's really the first time in American history that the two parties have sorted themselves out ideologically. We used to have a mix of conservatives, moderates, and liberals in both parties. So that's part of what changed, particularly at the elected officials level. And then starting in the 1990s, we really started to add this social polarization on top, where it started to become much more tribal and, animosity and anger across the partisan divide in a way that was kind of new in American politics. So the important bright spot in that pretty dismal landscape that I just described is that everyday Americans are not very polarized on the issues. So issues polarization among everyday Americans is actually fairly low, but we think it's high. So
I would have, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I kind of guessed where you were heading. I would have thought that.
Yeah. So, but there is a perception gap. So most of us think that the difference between the average Republican and average Democrat on policies is about twice what it actually turns out to be empirically. So to us, that gives insight into a strategic asset for trying to address the polarization challenge. And that is, if you could mobilize that kind of 80 to 90% of Americans who are not so divided on the issues, you might actually get some traction and be able to, boost problem solving. So we launched 3 years ago at NICD our flagship program called Common Sense American that is aimed at precisely doing that, mobilizing the American people across the partisan divide to identify and challenge solutions that are wise enough to attract broad bipartisan support. So if it's all right, I'll just share my screen for a second.
Please.
And take you through that a bit. So it's a membership organization open to any American citizen. So we invite everybody watching this to go ahead and join. You can go to commonsenseamerican.org, and that's the website that I'm sharing right now. We now have over 36,000 Americans who have joined. And I'll just say a little bit about how we've recruited them. We've recruited them mostly through social media, which mostly has been a bane for polarization, has made it worse. But we've used it in a constructive way. And I'll just give you this encouraging note in our experience. So if an ad comes up on your Facebook feed for us and you click on it, the click-through rate is higher, quite a bit higher than typical campaigns on Facebook. So we get about a 20 or 30% higher click-through rate than most successful ads. But where we really defy social media gravity is we have a 23% conversion rate. That is, if you click on the ad and you go to this website that I'm showing, 23%, nearly 1 in 4 will actually join. A successful conversion campaign has a 5% conversion rate. So we're about 4 or 5 times what is considered successful. Social media experts that we've used to work on this say they've never seen anything like it. It just defies social media gravity. So I think we have really found something that resonates with the American people. They really are hungry for a different kind of politics. And if you can give them a way of getting engaged in a more substantive, bipartisan way, they're pretty eager to join in. It is a politically balanced group. So today we're 25% Republicans, 46% independents, and 24% Democrats. That's purposeful. We, in our recruitment efforts, we've got our hand on the rudder to make sure we are recruiting a membership that looks like the country. And we're in every state across the country, north, south, east, and west, purple, red, and blue state. So it's a nicely balanced group. I'll stop sharing here for a second and go into a little bit more, particularly how we work with these 36,000 Americans and growing to find and champion solutions wise enough to attract broad support. So we do it in 4 steps.
Go ahead, Keith.
Yeah.
No, well, I was going to say, I want to hear your 4 steps because we only have a few minutes left, and I certainly want to hear what you're doing and how to solve it. Do you have any thoughts in terms of how we got here, though? I know that we were talking to someone else earlier today, and they attributed much of this, not all of it. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons, but the gerrymandering of congressional districts has eliminated kind of middle of the road statesmen and women, right, from being elected to office, because the big election, which never used to be the case, the big election nowadays tends to be the primary and not the general. There's not much drama left in most districts in terms of the general election. So I don't know if you agree with that sentiment, and you have other things to add. So maybe just quickly comment on that, but I'd love to hear your 4 steps.
Yeah, so somewhat counterintuitively, the evidence does not support that redistricting is much of the issue here. And I'll just give you the easiest evidence on this. It's a kind of a complicated question, but the easiest evidence is the polarization as measured by party line voting in the Congress has gone up at exactly the same rate in the Senate as in the House. And of course, there's no redistricting in the Senate. So it's fairly hard to say the polarization is caused by the redistricting because it's not unique to the House. It's just as true as the Senate. I'll say one more thing. There are a lot of contributing factors to it. I would say the first order effect, the biggest and earliest effect, is that the parties started to sort themselves out ideologically for the first time in American history in the late 1970s. We used to have a mix of liberals, moderates, and conservatives in both parties. That started to change for the first time in American history in the late 1970s. So it's the earliest and deepest, most systemic change. And then it helps contribute. Then there's a bunch of second and third order effects. Maybe the most important second order effect is then in the 1990s, we start to layer on other social identities become aligned with party in a way they hadn't before, including how religious you are, whether you live in a rural or urban area, and your race. Those didn't used to be correlated with your partisan identification. Now they are. And that's what's giving it much more of the kind of bitter personal quality to it. So I'd say first and second order effect are those two. And then there's a bunch of other contributing factors building on that.
So talk about the 4 steps that you're engaged in to try to help us eliminate some of this division.
So our members first help us pick one issue per year that is especially meaningful and ripe for bipartisan action. So we tend to not go after the most, hyper partisan polarized issues that are out there. Second, we then develop a thorough policy brief on that question. Our members commit 90 minutes per year to reviewing the brief and then weighing in. So they indicate whether they support or oppose each proposal that's described in the brief. Second, we develop that brief. Third, our members weigh in. They spend that 90 minutes reviewing the brief and weighing in. And then fourth, we engage Congress with the results. These are federal legislative questions. And so our members and we engage Congress with the results. We do that in 2 ways. First, our members commit to contacting their members of Congress to share their own views. We don't take official positions on legislation, and they just share whatever their own views are, whether they're in a 90% majority or 10% minority. And then second, we as a staff at the National Institute for Civil Discourse brief members of Congress with the overall results. And I might just share my screen quickly one more time and just show you. So our first issue was surprise medical billing. And we were an important part of passing legislation in 2020, ending that practice. And our second issue was infrastructure. And so I'll just show you in that, passed late last year. So just give you a quick look at the rather thorough brief that our members review before they weigh in. And then we have the results from that of, what proposals for infrastructure they supported and the open-ended responses and some of those sorts of things. So far, two issues that we've picked, surprise medical billing and infrastructure, and we were successful on both. And when your measure of success is passing an act of Congress, you should probably think of a different objective. But
right. If you're batting 2 for 2, I would be hard pressed to find another organization in America that's batting 1,000 like that, particularly in terms of promoting legislation in Congress.
Right. It is a tough battle, on each of those. I think on surprise medical billing, even 2 or 3 weeks before it passed, people were giving it maybe a 20 or 30% chance of passing. People are probably familiar with the bipartisan infrastructure slog that was to get through. So these were not easy to get done in a period of hyperpolarization. But it turns out, gratefully, that members of Congress are actually pretty persuaded by, if there is a large, thousands of Americans from across the political divide who will take a little time to get informed and engage a bit in practical problem solving, they're quite persuaded by those results. They really do take it into account. So it is, I think, a bright spot in a somewhat dismal political landscape that we have.
So Keith, tell us how someone can learn more about the National Institute for Civil Discourse and how they can get involved and how they can help the cause.
Well, thank you for that question, because we really believe that the American people will be our saving grace. So it's everyday Americans getting engaged that matters. The first way I'd recommend is to go to commonsenseamerican.org. It's with an N, and sign up and join the other 36,000 members. We also have other programs that give opportunities for everyday Americans to get involved in different ways, and you can find those at nicd.arizona.edu. And we certainly invite people to engage with us to see if we can't build our capacity to engage our differences more constructively than we are now.
That's great. And Keith, any last words for the viewers in terms of a good step for promoting civil discourse?
Yeah, I would say that the first principle and best practice of civil discourse is listening for understanding. So if you want to know where to start that's powerful, just start by engaging across that partisan divide, but do it first by listening, and listening for the merit, not just the flaws in what the other side is saying.
Good advice to live by. Thank you very much. Our guest today has been Keith Allred. He is with the National Institute for Civil Discourse. He's the executive director. I hope you reach out to that organization. Keith, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, David.
And this has been David Nevins for Citybiz List, and another in our discussions on behalf of the Bridge Alliance. And we're talking about repairing America's broken democracy. And clearly the National Institute for Civil Discourse is helping to achieve that. Thank you so much for joining us. Keith, thank you again for being with us.